Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we tackle a major weeding project. It is literally a jungle out here, so let's get at it. It's so easy to show off the beautiful beds that we have and put them on YouTube for you to look at. But the reality is the beds aren't all beautiful. They require a lot of work, a lot of maintenance, and a lot of time. So rather than making yet another video that just shows one beautiful bed after another, I wanted to show you the reality of what many of us gardeners face, which is a bed that needs a lot of work. Welcome to my north side garden. And this is a bed that I have neglected for a few years now. You can see there's a lot of beauty within this bed, but there are also a ton of weeds. Within the weeds are beautiful perennials. You just can't really notice them because it's overgrown. In fact, if you look straight down this way, it's a whole entire row of peonies. And actually, if you look, there's my backyard. We got all the beautiful daffodils towards the front of the bed. And right behind the daffodils is a whole entire row of beautiful daylilies. And they're not just your everyday daylilies. There's a lot of pretty specialty daylilies in here. But I really have neglected this bed. And it's a shame. So I want us together to start weeding this bed. Now I'm not going to video every single thing I do in this bed while I'm weeding it. I think you would probably get bored. So I'm going to do snapshots in time. And I'll be realistic. I'll let you know how long it took me to do this bed. So I'm going to get working at it, and I'll just show you little clips as I go. You'll notice that there's a lot of shade in this bed. And I've really been using this bed as almost a nursery bed, just a holding area for perennials. And I now officially have another nursery bed that's dedicated for that sole purpose of housing plants. So what I'm planning on doing over time is removing perennials in here, finding a permanent home for them. And if I can't find a permanent home, they're going to get moved to the nursery bed. But I need to start moving out plants, weeding, and then moving in plants. It's definitely a very shady location, so the plants that go in here have to be plants that like shade. I have a ton of hosta that needs a home, so I'm going to start with the hosta. But none of that can happen until the weeding starts. When I tackle weeding a bed that's this big, I just like to take my time and chunk it out in sections. I might just set a goal, like, okay, it is 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm going to pretty much weed until 5 o'clock, which is dinner time. And I'll take breaks in between, but otherwise that's my goal for this afternoon. And I would rather do a good, thorough, slow job than a quick job and have to weed again in another week. Fortunately, since I've been gardening for over 25 years, I can see what's a weed and what's a perennial because they are mixed in here. And I want to make sure that I'm getting all the roots out as I'm weeding, because otherwise those nasty weeds are just going to come back. I typically do not put the weeds in my compost pile because some of these weeds have already started going to seed. I'll just lay them out, put them in the sun, and then they just go into a pile where I have other weeds. Eventually they do break down and they're fine, but I just don't want to mix them in with my compost right away with all the weed seeds that are happening here. There, one little tiny patch is done. I'm happy with that. That is great. I'm basically going to work my way down this way a tiny bit, but then I'm going to start working that way. I want to chunk it up and just do sections at a time. I am noticing that it is very, very dry. bone dry, in fact, as my sister-in-law and brother-in-law would say. It's very dry out here. Some of the perennials are actually wilting. And I can tell you last year I actually lost some perennials in this bed. It just gets so dry. I will be adding irrigation to all my flower beds where the lawn ends and the woods start. I have flower beds in between. My husband and I will be adding irrigation to all these beds. I can't do that until I weed them. So I'm going to keep on weeding here. We got a lot to do. Something in this weedy mess. Right here are some perennials. And I know I don't have a lot of them in my yard, and I'm almost positive that it's Veronica. I always get confused between Veronica and Salvia for the simple reason that I just don't have much of it in my yard. But I'm pretty sure it's Veronica. I am going to dig them up, put them in pots, and put them down in my nursery bed. And when they bloom, I can then look around my yard and see where I'm going to place them. But sometimes it's good to just remove perennials from a bed, especially if you had it in a temporary holding spot like I did, and isolate them and let them bloom, see what they look like, look around your yard, and then find a new home for them. So I'm going to go ahead and dig them up, pot them up, and then just keep on weeding. And what they are, what plant they are, I'm just going to water them in, put them in my nursery bed that I have, and then I'll wait and see where I'm going to put them in my landscape. Just going to let the water soak in a little bit because you saw the soil was very, very dry. I'll keep them in the shade for probably 1 to 2 days just so they can recover. And after that, they'll go into the nursery bed. Okay, good. So this is where we left off, and where the shovel is where I just dug out those plants. I'm going to keep on weeding. Still a lot to go, but I'm not going to get intimidated. I'm going to look at what I'm getting done and be happy and proud of what I'm getting accomplished. I'm going to tackle that next. So I'm doing pretty good. I still need to edge, but where that purple creeping phlox is, it's full of a weed, and I really need to get to the weed. I want to pull it out of there. So I've shown you already, sometimes you just need to dig out a perennial, pull the weed out, and then you can put the perennial back. And if I want, that's a good time for me to divide it while I'm at it. So let's tackle that job next. Well, I dug up all of the creeping phlox, and even though it looked really beautiful and it was all nice and mounded, and right now it looks a little sad, I'm okay with doing that to the plant right now because I'm tackling this bed. And truth be known, you can't just wait for every single plant to do its thing before you decide to move it. Sometimes it might not be the most optimal time to do it, but for me, the most optimal time is while I'm tackling a bed. Just get it done. The plant will survive. I've given it water, and it will look just as beautiful next year as it did before I dug it up. It will look just as beautiful as this one over here. So I still have this pile over here. So I'm going to go ahead and plant it somewhere. I'll show you where I end up putting it. We are just headed to the west side of my house. What I've been doing this year is taking some of the creeping phlox and just kind of tucking them between some of the trees. I think it looks so cute. It's a little whimsical. I put one here. Check out all those daylilies. And I just put this one here. I'm going to give it some water and it'll be good to go. So I spent probably a total of 3 hours and I got quite a bit done. This is pretty much the big area where we weeded, and you can see I even watered because it's very dry, and I figured now that there's no weeds and I can see my perennials, I can see that some of them need water desperately. So this is where we're going to leave off for today. I'm going to show you the front side of the bed as well. Still a lot to be done, but we're getting there. So I'm on day 2 of this project. One thing I wanted to point out was that this section that I weeded is probably about 20 feet wide by about 10 feet deep. I have decided to change things up a bit. So we stopped weeding right there. You can see where the weeds start. And I'm going to point out a couple of things. Towards the back of this bed, I have some tree or shrub type structures. And towards the front of this bed, I have all different types of coral bells and heuchera. I'm going to leave both of those in place. And rather than continuing to weed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the perennials that are in the center of this bed. The perennials were planted here as a temporary spot because I didn't know where I was going to put them. I still don't know where I'm going to put them, in fact. But I do have a plant nursery now, and I'm going to put all of these plants that are towards the center into my plant nursery. I'm going to dig them up, put them in pots, and I'm going to empty out the center of the bed. My plan is to put some shade-loving plants in here, like hosta. And there are some bulbs in here as well that bloomed in the spring. They are between the perennials in the center and between the heuchera that are in the front. I'm going to leave all of the bulbs there for now. And next spring, after I see what's blooming again, I will then move those bulbs. I also planted a whole bunch of these bulbs because I didn't know where I wanted to put them in my yard. I think we all do that, don't we? We just sometimes don't have a home for our plants that we buy. And it's fine. It's all, experimenting, trial and error. So let's get at it. Let's start digging up some of these perennials. I'll show you how I dig them up and I'll tell you what they are. First thing I'm going to dig up is this iris. I have a bunch of this iris in a different spot of my yard, so this will not go into my plant nursery. I'm just going to add this to the collection of the same type of iris that's on the west side of my house. The reason it's even in here is because I used to have a whole bunch of iris in here. And clearly I forgot this one. I'm planning on just using the soil that I have here on the ground, which is, a lot of this is composted horse manure. And I will just keep amending these flower beds over time. So I don't mind taking from the bed because I will eventually give back to this bed and add more soil. I'm going to dig a bunch of plants and then I'm going to water them afterwards. I'm in the shade and it's a nice cool day, so I'm not too worried about them getting too dried out. Next up, we have some yarrow or a yarrow. This will definitely go into my plant nursery because I am selling yarrow and it's been quite popular. Keep looking at the different size pots to see what's a good size pot for the plant that I'm digging up. Very dry out here. I'm so glad we're getting a lot of rain tomorrow. What I've learned over time is sometimes the easiest thing you can do is just empty out an entire bed and start over again. That's kind of what I've done, to be honest with you, with a lot of my flower beds. The next plant we're going to dig up is the yucca. There's a little teeny tiny piece over here, and it just continues on. I got these from my good friend Michelle. She gave me, I think, one piece, and over the last many years, I have just continued to divide them. I'm going to be using a lot of this yucca as the centerpiece or the thriller for my pots. It's a cheap way of having a thriller in the center of a pot. And I mean, let's face it, what am I going to do with all this yucca? So I think it's a good use of a plant. There's certain plants that I like, but I don't love, but I don't want to get rid of. Yucca is one of them. But I think in a pot, it would look great in the center. I'm going to go ahead, give these guys some water. I'm going to dig out the rest of the yucca. I also have some Shasta daisy here. I'm going to dig out the Shasta daisy, and I will show you what this one section right here looks like when I'm done. Towards the front are some Veronica that I dug up yesterday, and also some sort of chives or onion. And there's actually some lamium there that was dug from a different spot. I have someone that's going to be buying 4 pots of lamium. Yay. So that's what that is. Anyway, here are the plants that I just dug up from that small little space. And it took me about 30 minutes. Did a really quick job. 2 of the yucca were huge, so I had to put them in a bucket. But they should be fine since they're going to be going in some sort of a container or pot within the next day or so. It all looks good. So I've been out here for about maybe 30 minutes, and I got a bunch of the perennials dug out. I still have more to dig out, but I just wanted to show you what I had. And what I'm going to do is anything that I've dug up is going to go down towards my nursery, and while I'm at my nursery, I'm going to bring some hosta up this way. So I'll show you what it looks like once I get them placed here. Why is it that small projects become big projects? It's all good. I placed a bunch of hosta that I had in pots over in this area. I got these hosta from a backyard gardener, and they look great from where I'm standing, but they're hidden behind this huge forsythia bush. So I said I wasn't going to move it, but I am. I'm going to move the forsythia bush, and I'm also going to plant all this hosta. So let me continue working on this project, and I'll give you an update. So here's the first hosta that we're going to start with. and they basically come down this way. And I made a pattern with them where this is like a nice blue colored leaf to it, and it alternates with a different hosta. It looks like it has a light green edge or a margin and a dark green in the center. So I'm going to go ahead and get these planted. While I'm planting, I'm going to be taking out weeds or anything else that I don't want that came along for a free ride. So time to get planting, lots to do. So I went ahead and dug out the forsythia that was here. I got a nice big root ball on it with some soil, and I moved it out front, which is the west side of my house. It gets a lot more sun there, so I made sure I dug a big enough hole, put a lot of water in the hole, and then I planted the forsythia bush out there. We have a lot of rain coming tomorrow, so it should be okay, and the temperatures are still quite cool. And that leaves up a nice open hole here where I am thinking I have some daffodils here. I could divide them and move them over here as well. Anyway, we'll see if we get to that. And then this lilac is still here. I'm going to leave it here for this year. So far, I have half of the hosta planted. And they're all very small because when I dug them up from my friend who had the hosta, I really just dug them up and divided them at that time. So it'll take them a number of years to get to a nice big size. But there are two different types of varieties in there, and I think it's going to look really pretty. So let me go ahead and keep planting the rest of these. All right, I got a bunch of the hosta planted. Just wait, in a couple more years, they're really going to fill in. So all that's left to do now is to continue digging out some more perennials from this bed, from the center section. I have some more hosta that's left over. I'll place that, and I will call this section pretty close to done. I did a great job with getting all those perennials in the center part of the bed removed. Let me bring you closer so you can take a look. Definitely not an easy task that I'm doing here, but in the long run, it's going to be well worth it. I have an empty slate in the center, and this pretty much is a shady spot. It has a little bit of dappled sun. It's about 2:30 in the afternoon. So I am going to have some fun filling this area up. I think that's what my plan is. I'm just going to keep weeding, removing the perennials from the center, and then shopping in my own yard, looking around, and adding some new perennials into each of these spots as I weed them. So let's go. Let's look for some free perennials in the yard. Before I find some perennials to put in that spot that I just cleaned up, I want to go over some of the plants that I dug up from this area. We have spiderwort. There are a couple of types of bee balm. There's Shasta daisy. There's some iris, globe thistle, some sort of small variety of sedum. There was lamium in there. And then, past the hose here, there was a big patch of coreopsis. A bunch of it is budded up and some of it's even blooming. They look sad right now, but they should bounce back. It's going to be in the 50s and 60s the next few days. I'm just going to keep them here in the shade. I gave everything a lot of water, so these perennials should be good to go. I'm either going to rehome them somewhere in my yard, or I'm going to sell them as part of my plant sale. Okay, enough of this. Let's go dig some perennials to put in the new spot that we just cleaned up. I have some tiarella in one part of my flower gardens, and I want to move it. I already have plenty of it in the same space. So I'm going to go ahead and dig this up, and we're going to divide it, and it's going to look beautiful in our new spot. So let's get digging. I went ahead and started dividing the tiarella, and I'm spacing them pretty close to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I've been dividing the tiarella, and after that we're going to get some hosta to plant in here. It's amazing how many pieces I've been able to pull off of this one clump of tiarella. So far I've already planted 11 of these, and I'm making the groupings pretty small. All I did to divide it was literally just pull it apart. So just like that. And what I did was I removed the lower leaves because I never got to it in the spring. These are last year's foliage. So I'm just using my cutter and I'm just snipping off the old leaves just to make it look a little bit fresher. And I'm pretty much keeping each of these groupings to this size right here. So let's do another piece. It's falling apart pretty easily for me actually, which is really nice. And tiarella likes to be in dappled sun. If you put it in deep shade, it will still look pretty, but it just won't look as vibrant as it would in dappled shade. And this area here definitely gets a little bit of sun. It's mostly, but I would call it dappled shade. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. And I'm spacing them pretty close to each other. I'm just using my shovel, and everything's about a shovel's length apart. So this guy right here will go here, just like that. Let me go ahead and finish dividing and planting these, and I'll show you what it looks like in the end. I'm getting one step closer to finishing this project. We're almost there. So I finished dividing and planting all the tiarella. I think it looks great. I'm going to add in some hosta, and I think this project will be done. This hosta is definitely not a mini hosta, and it's definitely not a large or extra large hosta. I would call it small, and it clumps pretty quickly. So I feel very happy about being able to dig this up, divide it into a bunch of smaller pieces just to fill up that other bed that we've been working on. So I'm going to go ahead and dig this up, divide it, plant it, and let's see how it looks. It's amazing how far just digging one clump of hosta can go. I literally thought I'd have to dig that huge clump out, or at least dig from it a few times. I only had to dig from it one time, which is pretty good. So I went ahead and planted all the hosta except for this one piece here. And sometimes with hosta, you need to use something to cut the roots with, like a shovel or a knife. This particular hosta was very easy to basically pull apart. So that's all I did was just pull it apart. There were some weeds in it. I took the weeds out. That's always important. When you're going to go through the effort of dividing your perennials, you might as well take the weeds out from it while you're at it. You don't want to give any weeds a free ride into a new place in your garden. So this one here is a little bit trickier. I'm just pulling at it. Here we go. And what I've been doing is, as I'm planting the hosta, I'm just making sure that I have at least 2 or 3 small pieces or 1 or 2 bigger pieces and planting them in the hole. So I only need 3 more pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and plant these, and I will show you what it looks like in the end. I'm officially done with this section of the bed, and boy does it feel good. It has been edged, it's been weeded the best that I can. There might be still a stray weed or 2 in there, but overall I would say it is weeded. There were some spring bulbs that I divided, moved a big forsythia bush, took out all the perennials in the center of the bed, and then went ahead while we were at it and added a whole bunch of perennials in the center part of the bed. And it is packed. The best part is I did it on a low budget, because after all, that's what my channel is all about. I just used perennials that I already had in my yard. I dug, I divided, I moved, and I am very pleased with how everything came out. In some sections, I've definitely packed the perennials, but that's okay. They're going to look great over the next few years, and if some perennials are a little too close, then at that time I can divide them. But these are all perennials that will do really well in this part shade part of my garden. So happy with how it came out. This was a huge stretch of bed right here. It's amazing how long it took me to do this project. I definitely took breaks in between. I worked on other projects, so it took me about a week. But in terms of hours, I would say that this project probably took me, I would say, about 7 hours total. But that includes not just the edging and the weeding. It also included digging up and potting up all the perennials in the center of this bed, as well as then taking perennials from other parts of my garden and planting them here. This project is done, but there's more to still be done. So stay tuned. I am motivated now, and hopefully you are too. So until next time, make it a great day with gardening.